September 19th, 1944. The fog-shrouded fields near Arracourt, France. First Lieutenant Merwin Marston of the 37th Tank Battalion gripped his Sherman's turret rim as his gunner peered through the periscope, scanning the mist-covered terrain ahead. They had been warned about Panthers, the formidable German tanks whose sloped armour had proven nearly impervious to standard American shells. What Marston and his crew didn't know was that tucked into their ammunition rack were 6 rounds that would rewrite the tactical calculus of armoured warfare. 6 M93 high-velocity armour-piercing rounds, each containing a tungsten carbide core capable of transforming their medium Sherman into what German tankers would come to fear as an unexpected threat. The psychological impact of this ammunition would prove as devastating as its penetrating power, shattering German assumptions about American tank capabilities and forcing a complete reassessment of Panther invulnerability. The story of how a specialized ammunition type altered the balance of armored warfare begins not on the battlefields of France, but in the testing grounds and industrial facilities of the United States, where metallurgists and ballistic engineers worked against time to solve a problem that threatened to undermine American armored operations in Europe. In early 1944, the United States Army faced a dilemma that military planners had failed to anticipate. The M4 Sherman tank, backbone of American armored divisions, was encountering German tanks it could not reliably defeat from the front. The Panther, Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34, combined a powerful 75mm high-velocity gun with an 80mm glacis plate sloped at 55 degrees, creating an effective thickness of approximately 140mm that proved nearly impenetrable to American tank guns. American intelligence had underestimated both the quantity and quality of Panthers that would be deployed. By June 1944, when Allied forces landed in Normandy, 38% of German tanks in the theatre were Panthers. Not the handful predicted, but hundreds of these advanced medium tanks, often crewed by inexperienced soldiers but protected by armour that conventional American tank guns could not penetrate frontally. The 75mm M3 gun that armed most Shermans in Normandy could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armour at any range. The round would simply bounce off the sloped glacis plate, leaving the Sherman crew vulnerable to return fire from the Panther's powerful gun, which could destroy a Sherman from over 2,000 meters. Even the improved 76mm M1 gun, which began reaching units in July 1944, struggled against Panther armor. Using standard M62 armor-piercing capped rounds, the 76mm could penetrate 109mm of armor at 1,000 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. This was sufficient against the Panzer IV and many German assault guns, but the Panther's sloped frontal armor remained effectively immune. The 76mm could penetrate the Panther's gun mantlet, but only at extremely close range, typically under 100 meters, a distance at which the Panther's advantages in firepower made engagement suicidal. The problem was not the gun itself, but the ammunition it fired. The deployment of the 76mm gun itself had been a saga of bureaucratic hesitation and belated recognition. The first M4 Shermans mounting the 76mm M1 gun rolled off production lines in January 1944. These M4A 176 Shermans arrived in Britain on April 10, 1944, with 130 tanks delivered to prepare for the Normandy invasion. Yet despite their availability, American commanders refused to deploy these improved tanks on D-Day. The reasons were multiple. Crews lacked adequate training time on the new weapon system. Logistical concerns about maintaining 2 different ammunition types complicated supply planning. Most critically, commanders believed the 75mm gun would prove adequate for the expected opposition. This proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. By early July 1944, field reports from Normandy painted a grim picture. On July 2nd, complaints about the 75mm gun's ineffectiveness against German armour reached General Dwight Eisenhower. His response, documented in multiple historical accounts, captured command-level frustration. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out?" Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war. The full quote, as recorded by witnesses, continued with stronger language expressing his anger that Ordnance had assured him the 76mm would take care of anything the Germans had. A board convened on July 12, 1944, determined officially what tank crews already knew from bitter experience. Standard American weapons could not defeat Panthers frontally. General Omar Bradley immediately ordered the 76mm Shermans rushed from Britain to the front. On July 25, 1944, during Operation Cobra, 102 M4A 176 tanks made their combat debut. The initial engagement reports were sobering. While the 76mm represented an improvement over the 75mm, it still struggled against Panther frontal armour at combat ranges. Sherman crews quickly learned they needed to manoeuvre for flank shots or target the Panther's gun mantlet at close range, neither option being tactically desirable when facing a tank that could destroy them from 2,000 meters away. The solution lay in metallurgy and physics. By July 1944, American ordnance engineers had developed the T4 round, later standardized as the M93 HVAP. High-velocity armor-piercing ammunition represented a fundamental departure from conventional armor-piercing design. The projectile consisted of a tungsten carbide core, one of the hardest materials available, surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body and ballistic windshield. This design concentrated the projectile's kinetic energy into a smaller, denser penetrator, while reducing overall weight. The result was dramatic. The M93 round achieved a muzzle velocity of 1,036 meters per second, compared to 792 meters per second for the standard M62 round. This 244 meter per second velocity increase translated directly into penetrating power. At 1,000 yards, approximately 914 meters, the HVAP round could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor at 10 degrees obliquity, according to official War Department testing data. Against the Panther's gun mantlet, with its curved 100mm thick cast steel on early AUSSF. D and A variants later increased to 120mm on the AUSSF. G, this meant reliable penetration at ranges up to 1,000 meters instead of point-blank distance. The mantlet suddenly became a viable target for Sherman crews who had previously been forced to attempt desperate flank attacks or retreat. But the development of HVAP represented only half the solution. Production was another matter entirely. The T4 round depended on tungsten carbide, a strategic material imported primarily from China, which produced 36% of global tungsten supply before the war. Tungsten was critical to numerous war industries, with machine tools, armor-piercing ammunition for multiple calibers, armor plate hardening, and various industrial processes all competing for limited supplies. American tungsten demand for HVAP ammunition alone consumed hundreds of metric tons annually. Each 76mm HVAP round contained approximately 0.8 kilograms of tungsten carbide, meaning a Sherman carrying 6 rounds required nearly 5 kilograms of this scarce material. China produced approximately 10,000 metric tons of tungsten concentrates in 1944, but this had to serve all Allied needs across all applications. The United States supplemented Chinese imports with domestic production from limited deposits in Colorado, Nevada, and California, but total availability remained constrained. Germany's tungsten position was far worse, with Swedish imports declining sharply as the war turned against the Reich and domestic production remaining minimal. By 1945, German factories desperately hoarded tungsten for machine tools needed for aircraft engine production, while Panther crews received only standard ammunition. The United States Ordnance Department had been testing HVAP projectiles since spring 1942, but production at scale did not begin until after the Normandy landings revealed the extent of the Panther problem. In July 1944, production of 3-inch HVAP rounds for tank destroyers reached 1,000 rounds. August saw 1,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP produced. September yielded another 1,000 76mm rounds. Not until November 1944 did monthly production reach 5,000 rounds for the 76mm, ramping to 7,000 rounds per month by January 1945. By March 1945, approximately 33,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP ammunition had been produced, representing a significant industrial effort, but still a fraction of what was needed. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman in Europe had received a total of 5 HVAP rounds. 5 rounds to face an enemy deploying Panthers as the standard tank in Panzer divisions. A Sherman company with 17 tanks would possess 85 HVAP rounds total, while facing German units that might field 30 or more Panthers. The first HVAP rounds reached the European theatre in August 1944, but their arrival was overshadowed by broader tactical problems. The Normandy hedgerows had forced American armour into close-quarters combat where superior German guns could ambush Sherman columns. Tank crews faced an enemy who had learned to position Panthers in hull-down positions, exposing only the heavily armoured turret while keeping the more vulnerable hull hidden. German doctrine emphasised first-shot capability, with Panthers waiting in prepared positions, allowing Sherman columns to approach before opening fire from ranges where American return fire was ineffective. The psychological impact on American tank crews was severe. Crews nicknamed the Sherman the Ronson lighter, claiming it lit on fire every time. While post-war analysis showed this reputation was exaggerated, the perception shaped behaviour. Tank commanders who spotted Panthers often chose to call for artillery or air support, rather than engage directly, ceding tactical initiative to an enemy who could be defeated with the right ammunition and tactics. The arrival of HVAP rounds began changing this calculus, but slowly, hampered by the scarcity of the ammunition and the lack of training on its capabilities and limitations. The first widespread combat test of HVAP ammunition came not in Normandy's hedgerows, but in the open country of Lorraine, where American armoured divisions had broken out into terrain that favoured German defensive tactics. September 1944 found Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army deep in France, racing toward the German border with logistics stretched to breaking point. The 4th Armoured Division, one of the most effective American armoured formations, had advanced aggressively, seizing a bridgehead over the Moselle River near Arracourt. German High Command recognized the threat. If Patton's armour reached the Rhine and crossed into Germany proper, the industrial heart of the Reich would be exposed. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army received orders to counterattack, destroy the American bridgehead, and push back Patton's advance. The German force assembled for this attack included 2 newly formed panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, equipped primarily with Panther tanks fresh from German factories. On paper, the German advantage appeared overwhelming. The 2 brigades together fielded approximately 150 tanks against Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division, which possessed roughly 50 Sherman tanks. The 113th Panzer Brigade alone entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns in both battalions combined, including 42 Panthers and 40 Panzer IVs. German planners anticipated a rapid victory. The Panthers' technical superiority should compensate for any American advantages in logistics or air support. They were fundamentally mistaken. The Battle of Arracourt, fought over 11 days from September 18th to 29th, would become the largest tank engagement fought by American forces until the Battle of the Bulge. More importantly, it would demonstrate that American tank crews, properly trained and equipped, could defeat technically superior German armour through superior tactics, combined arms coordination, and judicious use of high-velocity armour-piercing ammunition. The morning of September 19th began with thick fog blanketing the rolling terrain around Arracourt. German reconnaissance was limited. The Panzer brigades, lacking proper scouting units, advanced blindly into terrain held by American forces who knew the ground and had established defensive positions. At approximately 8 a.m., elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade penetrated American outposts east and south of Arracourt. The German tanks, factory-new Panthers with inexperienced crews, moved forward in column formation, a tactical error that veteran American tankers immediately exploited. Captain Kenneth R. Lameson's C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, held positions along key approaches to Arracourt. His Sherman crews had been briefed on the HVAP rounds in their ammunition racks, 6 rounds per tank. Use them wisely, the briefing had emphasized, against Panther turrets or mantlets at ranges where velocity remained sufficient for penetration. The fog that hindered German reconnaissance now worked in favor of American defenders. A section of Lameson's Shermans occupied positions south of the village when the first Panther materialized from the mist, barely 75 meters away. At this range, the Panther's superior long-range gunnery meant nothing. The American gunner fired instantly. The HVAP round, traveling at over 1,000 meters per second, struck the Panther's gun mantlet. The tungsten carbide core punched through the curved cast steel and detonated the ammunition stored directly beneath the gun breech. The Panther exploded, its turret lifting slightly from the force of the secondary detonation. 2 more Panthers emerged from the fog in quick succession. Both were destroyed within seconds, their crews having no time to effectively return fire in the limited visibility. The remaining German tanks turned away, crews shocked by the sudden loss of 3 Panzers to what they had been told were inferior American tanks. Throughout the morning of September 19th, similar engagements erupted across the Arracourt sector. American tanks, using the fog as concealment, engaged Panthers at ranges where HVAP rounds were most effective. The German tactical deployment proved disastrous. Advancing in column without proper reconnaissance, Panther crews repeatedly exposed their thinner side armor to American flanking fire. Near Arracourt's command post, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, also equipped with 76mm guns and HVAP ammunition, engaged German armor at close range. The fast-moving tank destroyers proved devastatingly effective in the close-range fog-shrouded combat. By noon, as the fog lifted, American forward artillery observers could coordinate fire with defending tank companies. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers of the 405th Fighter Group arrived overhead, diving through gaps in the cloud to strike German armor with rockets and machine guns. The combination of American advantages became clear. While the Panther possessed superior armor and firepower as an individual weapon system, American forces employed combined arms tactics as standard doctrine. German tanks advanced without adequate artillery support, without air cover, without infantry to clear American defensive positions. American forces coordinated armor with artillery, air power, infantry, and tank destroyers in an integrated system that overwhelmed German technical advantages. When Panthers encountered these prepared defenses, they were destroyed piecemeal despite their superior capabilities. The HVAP ammunition did not make Sherman tanks equal to Panthers in technical specifications. But warfare is not conducted according to technical specifications alone. Tanks are destroyed by crews who exploit vulnerabilities under combat conditions. The Panther's gun mantlet, necessary to allow the 75mm gun to elevate and traverse, created a weak point. The junction between turret and hull, the side armor, the engine deck, all represented targets that HVAP-equipped Shermans could now engage successfully at combat ranges that previously had been suicidal. More devastating to German morale was the psychological impact of discovering their armor was no longer invulnerable. Panther crews had been trained to believe their tanks could not be penetrated frontally by American fire. Intelligence briefings emphasized the Shermans' inadequate firepower. Crews were told that as long as they kept the front toward the enemy, they were safe. The first Panther commanders to watch Sherman rounds punch through their mantlets and detonate ready ammunition learned otherwise. Survivors of such encounters carried that knowledge back to their units, spreading awareness that American tanks now possessed ammunition capable of defeating Panthers. By the afternoon of September 19th, German tank commanders were reporting to headquarters that American Shermans possessed new, more powerful ammunition. The reports were confused and contradictory. Some claimed the Americans had secretly deployed tank destroyers with 90mm guns. Others suggested the British had provided 17-pounder Firefly tanks to American units. The truth, that American industry had developed specialized ammunition that partially negated the Panther's armor advantage, was more troubling to German planners than any of these theories. It meant that American industrial capacity could respond to tactical problems faster than German industry could counter them. The fighting continued through September 22nd, when the major German offensive efforts finally stalled. American forces had destroyed or disabled approximately 86 German tanks and assault guns. American losses stood at 25 Sherman tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The kill ratio heavily favored the Americans despite their technical disadvantage in individual tank performance. The Battle of Arracourt represented not just a tactical victory, but a psychological watershed. American tank crews learned that they could defeat Panthers without waiting for specialized tank destroyers or overwhelming air support. German crews lost the psychological security of believing in absolute frontal invulnerability. The German perspective on Arracourt was one of confusion and bitter recrimination. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns, could muster fewer than 20 operational vehicles by September 29th. German after-action reports struggled to explain the defeat. The technical superiority of the Panther was undeniable on paper. How had inexperienced crews in newly produced tanks been defeated so comprehensively? The answers lay partly in training and experience. The Panzer Brigade crews had minimal training, often arriving at the front with only weeks of instruction. American tank crews in the 4th Armoured Division were veterans who had fought across France, understood combined arms warfare, and had learned to read terrain for tactical advantage. But training alone did not fully explain Panther losses, particularly the penetrations that should not have been possible with standard American ammunition. German intelligence officers examining destroyed Panthers found entry holes smaller than expected, suggesting a subcaliber projectile. Examination of unexploded rounds recovered near disabled tanks revealed the truth. The Americans had deployed tungsten-cored ammunition. This discovery had profound strategic implications. Germany itself had developed similar ammunition, the Panzergranit 40, which used tungsten cores to improve penetration. But German tungsten supplies were critically limited by late 1944, with production focused on machine tools rather than ammunition. If Americans could field specialized tungsten-cored ammunition in quantities sufficient to distribute to frontline tank units, it demonstrated industrial capacity and resource access that Germany could not match. Not only were American tanks more numerous and better supported logistically, but they were now equipped with ammunition that partially negated Germany's carefully engineered technical advantages in armor protection. The impact of HVAP ammunition extended beyond the immediate tactical results at Arracourt. As word spread through American armored units that the new ammunition could defeat Panthers under favorable circumstances, tank crews became more willing to engage German armor directly. The psychological paralysis that had affected some units during the difficult Normandy fighting began to dissipate. Crews still respected the Panther's capabilities, but no longer felt helpless against it. This shift in morale proved crucial for subsequent operations. A crew that believes it can fight will engage aggressively, seeking advantageous positions and taking calculated risks. A crew that believes it is outmatched will hesitate, ceding initiative to the enemy. HVAP ammunition, though in critically short supply, provided American tankers with a weapon that allowed them to fight Panthers on more equal terms. Even crews that had never fired an HVAP round benefited psychologically from knowing the ammunition existed and might be available when most needed. Commanders were forced to make difficult prioritization decisions with the limited HVAP supply. Tank destroyers, whose mission focused specifically on anti-tank combat, received preferential allocation. Sherman tanks, with their dual role of supporting infantry and engaging armor, often received fewer rounds despite encountering enemy tanks more frequently. This created operational tension between tactical needs and supply realities. The allocation system, managed at multiple command levels from army down to battalion, resulted in inefficiencies. Some units received more HVAP than they could immediately use, while others exhausted their supply within days and received no resupply despite urgent requests. When German forces launched their surprise offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, American tank units faced renewed intense pressure. The Battle of the Bulge saw hundreds of Panthers and Tiger tanks deployed in winter conditions that favored defensive fighting and limited Allied air superiority due to poor weather. American Sherman crews relied heavily on their scarce HVAP ammunition to engage German heavy armor. The shortage became critical within days of heavy fighting. Some units exhausted their HVAP supply completely and found resupply requests going unfulfilled as logistical networks struggled to deliver ammunition through snow-blocked roads disrupted by German advances. Yet even in the difficult fighting of the Ardennes, American forces demonstrated that tactical skill and combined arms coordination could compensate for technical disadvantage. Tank crews coordinated closely with infantry, using bazooka teams to disable Panthers from close range, while Shermans provided covering fire. Artillery forward observers called in time-on-target missions that damaged optics, disabled tracks, and killed exposed crew members, even when shells could not penetrate armor. Air support, when weather finally permitted in late December and January, proved devastatingly effective against German armor concentrated on approach roads. The Battle of the Bulge ended with German armored forces shattered, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and experienced crews in an offensive that failed to reach its objectives. By early 1945, the strategic picture had shifted decisively and irreversibly in Allied favor. American and British forces were preparing to cross the Rhine. Soviet armies were advancing from the east, having shattered German defensive lines in massive winter offensives. Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under combined strategic bombing, loss of territory containing critical resources and manufacturing facilities, and severe shortages of raw materials including fuel and tungsten. Panther production, which had reached 3,900 units in 1944, fell sharply in early 1945 as factories were bombed, transportation networks disrupted, and raw materials became unavailable. Even when Panthers were produced, fuel shortages often kept them immobile. German tank units in the final months frequently abandoned tanks not because of combat damage, but because they had no fuel to operate them. The technical limitations of HVAP, while less publicized than its successes, deserve examination for historical completeness. The tungsten carbide core, while excellent at penetrating armor when conditions were favorable, was inherently brittle. Below certain impact velocities, approximately 2,300 to 2,500 feet per second, the core could shatter on contact rather than penetrating. This meant that HVAP effectiveness declined significantly at longer ranges where velocity had decreased. The effective range against Panther mantlets was approximately 1,000 meters. Beyond this distance, the probability of the core shattering on impact increased substantially. American tankers learned these limitations through combat experience, sometimes tragically. Crews that fired HVAP at Panthers beyond effective range wasted scarce ammunition and often provoked return fire from German guns that remained effective at much longer ranges. Training on proper HVAP employment was often minimal, as the ammunition arrived at frontline units faster than training materials could be developed. Many crews learned effective employment techniques through trial and error under combat conditions. Sergeant Francis Baker's documented experience on November 20, 1944, illustrated both the potential and limitations of HVAP in actual combat. His Sherman, equipped with a 76mm gun and carrying HVAP rounds, engaged a Panther at approximately 800 yards. Baker's gunner fired at least 7 rounds, with multiple hits observed on the Panther's side armour. To Baker's frustration, the rounds bounced off without achieving penetration. The engagement demonstrated that even HVAP had significant limits against sloped armour at oblique angles. The Panther withdrew from the engagement rather than continuing the fight, so the action was not a complete tactical failure, but it reminded Sherman crews that HVAP was not a magical solution. Proper tactics, careful shot placement, favourable range estimation, and advantageous angles of engagement remained critical factors. HVAP gave American tankers significantly better odds, but success still required skill and judgment. The post-war analysis of HVAP ammunition revealed both its successes and limitations. Against the Panther's gun mantlet at ranges up to 1,000 meters, HVAP was highly effective when hits were achieved, reliably penetrating and often causing catastrophic secondary explosions. Against the glacis plate, results were poor except at very close ranges and favorable angles. The extreme slope meant that tungsten-cored rounds traveling at high velocity often ricocheted or shattered on impact. This meant Sherman crews still needed to maneuver for advantageous shot angles, flanking Panthers when tactically possible. The ammunition did not make Sherman tanks technical equals to Panthers, but it gave American crews a fighting chance in engagements where previously they had little hope of frontal penetration. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, provided another combat test of HVAP effectiveness. American Sherman tanks, now primarily the M4A3E8 variant armed with 76mm guns, faced Soviet-built T-34-85 tanks in North Korean and later Chinese service. Unlike the situation in Europe, where HVAP had been critically scarce, by 1950 tungsten supplies were no longer constrained by competing wartime demands, and substantial stocks were readily available. American tank crews in Korea found that HVAP rounds easily penetrated T-34-85 armour at normal combat ranges. The T-34-85, while capable, possessed armour protection significantly inferior to the Panther. Its 90mm thick turret front and 45mm thick glacis plate could not resist tungsten-cored projectiles fired at high velocity from 76mm guns. American Shermans in Korea achieved remarkably favourable exchange ratios against communist armour, due partly to superior crew training, but also significantly to the plentiful availability of HVAP ammunition. The vindication of the 76mm Sherman in Korea was bittersweet for veterans of European combat. The ammunition that could have been more widely employed in Europe proved devastatingly effective in Asia when supply constraints no longer limited employment. The German perspective on American HVAP ammunition, gathered from post-war interrogations and examination of captured documents, revealed grudging professional respect and deep frustration. German ordnance officers recognized that American industry had solved the tungsten core ammunition problem more successfully than German manufacturers, despite Germany having pioneered the underlying technology. While Germany had developed tungsten-cored ammunition with the Panzer Granit 40 series, production limitations meant these rounds were never available in sufficient quantities. American production of HVAP, though also limited by tungsten scarcity, still exceeded German capability substantially by late 1944. German tank crews interviewed after the war frequently mentioned American ammunition improvements as a significant factor that complicated their tactical situation. The knowledge that Sherman tanks could penetrate Panther mantlets at combat ranges meant German crews could not simply rely on frontal armour for protection. This forced more cautious tactics, slower advances, and greater reliance on defensive positions. But defensive warfare ceded initiative to American forces, allowing them to employ combined arms tactics that negated German advantages. The psychological impact of losing armor invulnerability contributed to the increasingly defensive mindset that characterized German armored operations in 1945. Technical analysis of HVAP projectiles recovered from German tank wrecks provided German engineers with detailed understanding of American ammunition design. The tungsten carbide core surrounded by lightweight aluminum body sections represented efficient use of scarce strategic materials that maximized penetrating power while minimizing tungsten consumption per round. The lightweight carrier body allowed higher velocities without excessive barrel wear, while the dense tungsten core retained kinetic energy over distance far better than steel penetrators. German engineers recognized these advantages, but lacked the industrial capacity and material resources to respond with similar developments. By late 1944, German tank and ammunition production focused entirely on maintaining output of existing designs rather than developing new ammunition types. The Panther's KWK 42-75mm gun already possessed excellent penetrating power with standard ammunition against Allied tanks, so developing improved German rounds was not the critical priority. Developing new ammunition would require tungsten Germany could not spare, and retooling that factories struggling under air attack could not accommodate. German tanks in the final year fought with ammunition designs dating to 1942 and 1943, while American ammunition continued improving. The Battle of Arracourt's historical significance extended far beyond immediate tactical results. The engagement proved conclusively that American armored doctrine, emphasizing mobility, combined arms coordination, superior logistics, and overwhelming material support, could consistently defeat German tactical methods relying heavily on superior individual tank performance. German commanders had designed their 1944 Panzer brigades around the Panther's technical capabilities, assuming armor and firepower would compensate for inexperienced crews and limited support. This assumption proved catastrophically false. The lesson was clear to military observers on both sides. Technical excellence in weapons design mattered and provided advantages, but operational excellence in combined arms warfare, superior logistics, and better training mattered more for achieving tactical and operational success. The impact of HVAP on individual tank crews deserves consideration beyond purely technical analysis. For American tankers who had faced Panthers with only standard ammunition during difficult Normandy fighting, the arrival of HVAP represented tangible hope. The ammunition did not eliminate the Panther threat, but provided a tool that offered reasonable chances of achieving penetration under favorable circumstances. This psychological boost contributed to improved performance and more aggressive tactics. For German tankers, the knowledge that American tanks now posed a credible frontal threat fundamentally altered tactical calculations. Otto Carius, a highly decorated German tank ace who commanded Tiger tanks and survived the war, wrote extensively in his post-war memoirs about the psychological impact of facing enemies who could penetrate his armor. The sense of invulnerability that thick armor provided was crucial to crew morale and aggressive tactics. When that sense eroded, crew performance suffered measurably. Panther crews facing HVAP-equipped Shermans experienced this erosion of confidence. The mantlet became a known vulnerability that competent American crews could exploit. This knowledge made Panther crews demonstrably more cautious, slower to engage, and generally less willing to take tactical risks. The strategic implications of HVAP development extend to broader questions about technological competition in modern warfare and the crucial importance of industrial capacity. Both American and German research establishments possessed competent engineers and sophisticated understanding of ballistics and armor penetration. Both recognized the value of tungsten-cored ammunition early in the war, and both developed functional designs. The critical difference came down to industrial capacity and resource availability, rather than scientific knowledge. American industry could produce HVAP in quantities sufficient to influence battlefield outcomes meaningfully, though never enough to fully equip all units. German industry could barely produce enough to conduct testing. This pattern repeated across numerous weapon systems throughout the war. Germany developed sophisticated and often technically superior weapons, but could not produce them in quantities that affected strategic outcomes. American industrial capacity produced less sophisticated but highly effective equipment in overwhelming numbers. The M4 Sherman was objectively not the best tank of World War II by most technical measures, but American factories produced approximately 49,324 of them, compared to approximately 6,132 Panthers. This 8-to-1 production ratio, combined with ammunition improvements like HVAP that reduced the technical gap, proved strategically decisive. The post-war careers of veterans who fought at Arracourt reflect the enduring impact of these combat experiences on military thinking. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who commanded the 37th Tank Battalion at Arracourt with distinction, rose to become United States Army Chief of Staff and gave his name to the M1 Abrams main battle tank. The lessons Abrams learned about combined arms warfare, the critical importance of crew training, and the necessity of adequate ammunition influenced his entire career and the doctrine he helped develop. The M1 Abrams was deliberately designed with a powerful 120mm smoothbore gun and sophisticated ammunition types, including depleted uranium penetrators that serve functionally the same role HVAP served in World War II. German veterans of Panther units who survived the war and later joined the West German Bundeswehr brought different but equally important lessons. They had personally experienced the limitations of possessing technological superiority without the industrial base and logistics to support it. Bundeswehr armor doctrine during the Cold War emphasized quality and training while explicitly recognizing that West Germany could not match Soviet numerical superiority. But Bundeswehr planners, informed by wartime experience, also emphasized ammunition effectiveness. The Leopard 1 and later Leopard 2 main battle tanks used sophisticated ammunition designs informed by the realization that ammunition technology and crew training mattered as much as armor thickness. The conclusion of World War II in Europe, marked by Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, ended the immediate tactical need for HVAP ammunition against Panthers. American ordnance officers systematically examining destroyed vehicles found clear evidence of HVAP penetrations on some wrecks, confirming the ammunition's effectiveness under favorable conditions while noting its limitations. Panthers hit by HVAP typically showed penetrations through the mantlet or turret face when struck at favorable angles, but rarely through the glacis plate, which remained highly resistant. This pattern validated American tactical doctrine that emphasized flanking maneuvers and creating favorable engagement angles. The comprehensive post-war analysis concluded that while HVAP meaningfully improved Sherman capabilities against heavy German armor, the truly decisive factors remained overwhelming numerical superiority, vastly better logistics, complete air superiority, superior artillery support, and more effective operational doctrine. The transformation of American tank crews from mid-1944 to early 1945 reflected the cumulative impact of combat experience, improved equipment availability, and familiarity with specialized ammunition, including HVAP. Crews that landed in Normandy in June 1944 often felt genuinely apprehensive about facing German armor, particularly Panthers and Tigers. By early 1945, after months of sustained combat, significant training improvements, increased availability of 76mmShermans, and growing familiarity with HVAP ammunition, American tankers approached engagements far more confidently. This psychological shift had direct tactical consequences. Confident crews fought more aggressively, took calculated risks when opportunities appeared, and exploited tactical advantages. While HVAP ammunition alone did not create this transformation, Its availability and proven effectiveness contributed meaningfully to improved American armored force morale and tactical performance. The legacy of HVAP development continues influencing modern ammunition design. American armor doctrine from 1945 onward consistently emphasized ammunition effectiveness as a critical component of tank design. Modern tank ammunition uses depleted uranium or tungsten alloy penetrators, materials chosen for essentially the same density and hardness properties that made tungsten carbide effective in World War II. The underlying principle remains constant: concentrate maximum kinetic energy into a small, extremely dense projectile moving at the highest achievable velocity. The continuity from 1944 HVAP to present-day armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot ammunition illustrates how foundational lessons from World War II continue directly influencing military technology. Soviet and later Russian tank ammunition development followed remarkably similar paths, independently recognizing that armor-piercing capability depends heavily on projectile material properties and kinetic energy delivery. The global tank ammunition industry had its technological roots in the HVAP experience, where engineers first demonstrated conclusively that specialized ammunition could partially overcome armor protection advantages. September 19, 1944, when First Lieutenant Merwin Marston's Sherman crews first engaged Panthers with HVAP ammunition at Arracourt, marked a genuine turning point in the psychological balance of armored warfare. German crews who had fought confidently behind their armor learned that American tanks could pose a serious frontal threat. American crews who had felt outmatched gained meaningful confidence from knowing they possessed ammunition that could defeat Panthers under favorable circumstances. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by tungsten-cored ammunition produced in American factories, influenced every subsequent armored engagement of the European War. HVAP ammunition, though never available in desired quantities, provided enough improved capability to transform American tank crews from uncertain defenders into confident attackers willing to engage German armor directly. The crews who fired those first HVAP rounds in combat, watching tungsten cores punch through armor that had seemed invincible, demonstrated that industrial capacity and material science, applied intelligently to urgent tactical problems, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. This fundamental lesson, learned at considerable cost on battlefields across Europe, remains directly relevant for military planners facing the technological challenges of modern warfare.